Hi guys, we are now at Seeing is Believing. Of course it is. Exactly that. That's why I don't feel that I I don't upload everything, because seeing is believing and I have my beliefs. I know what I see, and bugger anybody who don't believe me, and bugger anybody who don't. That's not my problem. My idea is myself, my children, and working us out, rather than concentrating on bringing forth evidence for other people. There was a time where it's all I concentrated on was bringing evidence forth, bringing evidence forth. Do you know what now? I don't care. I actually have loads and loads, mounds of pictures everywhere, hidden everywhere. The stuffed in this drawer, that drawer. Oh yeah, I remember that. And then I have all these discs where I put them all onto discs, and I have so much that I will show the right people. And I already know the right people are to show anyway. So, however, you never know in the future. Maybe I'll do private videos for certain little eyes only. I think that might be a good idea, because it's not about putting it out there like to have people judge or see it. It's more about sharing it with friends, sharing it with people that I trust, and just them seeing it, so that they can say, oh yeah, and we can discuss. I think that's a very good way forward for me, not having it public but keeping it in a small circle where I trust people. I'm quite happy to do that. I prefer that, to be honest. Fairies' appearances evolved over centuries. It's common that, over time, supernatural beings or representations of them are to change to fit into society. As society changes, they change. People who do see fairies point out they are shape shifters. They can change form, and I have to say that is also a belief of mine. However, they do seem to be able to find a form that they fit comfortably, and they prefer that one. They can present themselves the way they want to be seen, or how we want to perceive them. They can read our mind, remember, so all fairies have some form of human appearances in them. If not complete, they do have some form. Their appearance does vary from hideous to extremely beautiful. Some, even though extremely beautiful, had a deformity they could not always hide. This applies usually to such as brownies, elves, The Aberdeenshire brownies, they had a thumb, but the rest of their fingers were joined together, kind of like a mitten. The Spriggans of Cornwall, they were grotesquely ugly, wise old men with large, childlike heads. Red hair was often construed as indicating fairy blood. Some have green eyes. The Irish Sihi and goblins sometimes are described as having greenish skin. They do tend to have, like, their skin's like greenish, greyish and brown. It's like that colour, so they can blend in. Especially when you look at elemental types, because they have to blend into the trees and stuff and the leaves, so, it makes sense that that's kind of what they would pick as a skin colour. Shetland fairies have a yellow complexion with red eyes and green teeth. They wore grey with brown mittens. Fairies that lived closely with humans, kind of like the brownies, I guess, generally look like old men dressed in shabby clothing. The fairy knights and bodies of medieval romances and Celtic legends are human, more human-sized, and are of shining beauty. Most fairies were extremely good looking in that type. Long hair, glowing complexion. Welsh fairies will have golden hair, whereas most all over England, the rest of them, they would have black hair or dark brown hair. Although many were described as human size, they're also referred to as little people, often viewed as small. They weren't nowhere near as small as they come to be represented from Victorian era onwards, by the way. In fact, some fairies, such as the Irish Sihi, typically will be around 7 foot tall, if not more. The Sihi are perceived to be light beings that are full of bright light, that they are just like human size or smaller. They are not. The Sihi are very, very Seelie, if you want to call them the Seelie, whatever. I prefer the Sihi because it's how it's meant to be pronounced. But they are very tall, and believe it or not, they will show themselves however they want to show themselves. They have guardians that walk in front of them and behind them. And these guardians, they look like hounds, very tall hounds with also people features. So it comes to understand maybe where the myth of werewolf came from. I don't think it's that so much werewolf, because I think it's ethereal, and I think it's more ethereal than blood and bone. Not saying it can't be blood and bone, because I believe it can. In fact, I know that it can, actually. But the point is, that's what their guardians look like. There's guardians of waterways that look like this too, and they can definitely make one think that it's a different kind of being when actually it's just a Sihi guardian that watches over them or watches over a particular portalway, waterway, ley lines, old Roman lanes, etc. You can find them, by the way, if you go to the old ley lines, go to waterways, bridges, especially bridges where one waterway leads into another waterway, and even one waterway into a lake. You can, there's a way of calling them. I'll do a private video on it so that you know how, if there's anybody interested, obviously, then I'll do a private video on that. Of course, when you look at fairies, people do generally believe them to be childlike, in childlike sort of size to the age of 3, maybe. Some will say they're 3.5 feet. Some will say that they're like the size of a 3-year-old child. Very small fairies appear to be a type of fae. Not so much a fairy, but a subspecies of the fae. Not, so even though they're categorized as that, they're not so much one of them rather than a subspecies of them. And I think there's many of those anyway, In the 12th century, there's a story of Hela and the Fairy King. They are simply described as small, yet the story by William of Newsbury, in 12th century also, there are normal proportions of sizes in there. Completely normal. That's our Dougal having a real weird jumping session for some reason. Tiny fairies were recorded in early literature. The Gervase of Tilbury described the the Portunes in the 13th century as only half an inch tall. Some say this is a copyist error and should be more properly rendered to be 6 inches, with old man's faces and patched coats. They lent an hand around the house, seemingly more closely related to the brownie. In Cornwall, fairies were once described as life-size, but in consequence of long-forgotten sin, they dwindled in size until they turned into ants. That's interesting, because I have never ever seen a fae ant or spoke to one. Soul's adventures, the sleepers, the dreamers, the soul adventurers, let's say. The diminutive size of fairies may be due to the association that they had to death. The soul being thought as a tiny creature that would come out of us humans, and the fact that the fae were seen as tiny creatures, like tiny balls of light, just as a soul would. This is more to do with the relation in what was believed the fae being the dead. It's not so much as a fact, but more of a belief system of the Victorian times, is that that's what they were, because obviously they were the souls of people, I guess. Which, again, It's interesting to say the least, because who knows, but that was more Victorian times, I think, than it is now anyway. I don't think it would matter now. It just depends, I suppose, doesn't it? So there was a common belief that all fairies are small size, but they have magic that enables them to imitate a human, sometimes assuming the guise of an animal as well. In Scotland, fairy women could assume the shape of a deer. Well, that's well known through time. The esoteric texts of the late 19th century describe fairies as having bodies lighter than gaseous nature, and they have no clear-cut shape unless they choose to show themselves in human form, which they can only do temporarily. They appear as small, hazy, and luminous clouds of colour with a bright nucleus. So let's say if you were looking at a cell, so to speak, you would see a white, what they're saying is it would look like a white ball with a nucleus in the middle, so they're saying it would look like an actual cell, I guess. Very odd. Can you imagine seeing that? Floating cells. I was just in this vision in my head of all these cells. Just, never mind. But it's like the webs of life, the weaving of life. As you know, Arachnia weaves, and she weaves so well. She weaves the passage to where the gods fly. I don't know if you know that, but yeah. Well, these weaves that spoke of Arachnia weaving the passage to where the gods fly and to tell all the secrets and the sins. The purpose of that was meant to be the fact that these were created by Fae. It was a way of them documenting what was happening through time, the sins that gods and goddesses did, the good that they did and the bad that they did. And then there's the theory that these, what you would say, I suppose, webs that are invisible, usually to the human eye, they are only seen by certain people. When you first start to see them, you generally just get flashes, and they kind of look like lines of, I don't know, kind of lines of electricity that's wispy and bendable and pliable. That's when you first start seeing them. When you can see them properly, then you can create, well, you can just, how do I explain this? When you know how to work energy and how to bring forth these lines, then you can kind of create them, because if you need one, it will just be there, you know? So that is regarding the seeing is believing, and I think it's interesting that despite the various places, everybody wants to assume that they are small, but they're not. Not all of them. It's more the elementals. They are small because that's how they are. It's how they grow, and the fact that they are just everywhere. The Fae, don't underestimate that some Fae can be anything up to 9 feet tall, if not taller. It's just that side of them, there's not much out there that would that comes under aliens, and some believe that aliens are the Fae. So, but yeah, there's not many writings about really tall Fae. There is some, but not many. However, don't be deceived. They're not tiny beings. They are not. I mean, there's some giants said that are in the Fae realm that can be the size of an ant, but can also fill the sky. So you see, the myths are quite curious, to say the least. So yeah, thank you for listening, guys. I do appreciate it. And we shall continue with the next, which goes on to fairy wings. Hi, guys. We are now on the fairy wings, and modern fairies are usually depicted as tiny young humanoid females with wings. About half of all modern fairy sightings will feature some sort of wings. Other accounts of fairies sometimes describe them moving through the air or from place to place instantly. They fly by means of magic, sometimes perched on ragwort stems or on the backs of birds. There are stories of fairies levitating objects and even buildings. The growing association of fairies with them being more winged beings could be related to some early Christian influences and the conception of fairies having originated from fallen angels. And angels were represented with wings, therefore ended up being on the fae. But there's also some inspiration that may have come from earlier 16th century, the putti or the cherubs. There was a key moment in the representation of fairies, and this was it was Alexander Pope's report of what they were like. This was in a poem. The book was a 1712 book, and it's more of a 18th century English poem because that's when it became more notable, even though the book itself is 1712. And he reflects on the beings and he writes about them and he points them out as sylphs and then mentions fairies and then elvens as separate beings. However, the way that they are described in this poem is very similar to the more modern day fairies. He wrote, "He summons straight his denizens of air, the lucid squadrons round the sails repair. Soft o'er the shrouds aerial whispers breath, that seemed but zephyrs to the train beneath. Some to the sun their insect wings unfold, waft on the breeze or sinking clouds of gold, transparent forms too fire for mortal sight, their fluid bodies half dissolved in light." Thomas Slotard was a late 18th century illustrator and he illustrated for Pope's poem and he depicted them with butterfly wings on the basis of that line. They were done in 1798, the illustrations, but the butterfly wings came from the line, "Some to the sun their insect wings unfold." So I guess they kind of took that line and then made a perception of butterfly wings, and that's how the butterfly wings ended up on the fae. Those fairies indeed strongly resembled the Italian putti. Then there's Joanne Heinrich. This is 1790. Did a painting. The dog just fell off sofa. Awesome. That was funny. Did a painting. I don't know how she managed to do that. Of a puck, but the puck was shown with bat wings rather than normal wings, and it's a completely different picture. But on my uploads of fairies back in time 2 and 3, there is a link and a code in the description where you can go and see this picture. It's different to say the least. 19th century winged fairies began to appear in children's stories, and that's when they take on that whimsical quality. They lost all the frightening characteristics and sort of became tiny and with tailored outfits complete with shoes and hats. They would then be given dragonfly or butterfly wings. Fairies having wings was further sort of popularised by Victorian theatre. Wings were placed on costumes, they were placed on characters because it was a way to indicate that they were supernatural or that they held supernatural powers. The image of elves also became fixed at this time as being tiny people with pointed ears and stocking caps. For example, if you look at Richard Doyle's illustrations from 1824 to 1833, that's where you'll see the elves came from. More on how they look, should I say, not where they actually came from, but what they were meant to look like and what they wore. 19th century Scandinavian, the tradition of elves. They were adapted to include small insect winged beings. That was Hans Christian Andersen. This was a book, The Elf of a Rose, and he was so tiny that his home was a rose blossom, and his wings, they would reach past his shoulders, down by his elbows and right to his feet. You could probably Google that and I'm sure it will come up with an image of what I'm talking about. But again, it put wings on an elf and made the elves very small. Fae with wings also became more popular after the publication of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan 1906. Obviously, everybody knows that Peter Pan was kind of well known for Tinkerbell and making it a nice little fairy being, which is not so much correct. And then there was, I think it was Rackham 1867 to 1939, also illustrated fairies with wings, and many tend to follow that one afterwards. They would follow Rackham's illustrations and do very similar ones. The influence of Germanic Romantic literature, it remained prominent in the 20th century. Children's literature, for example, like Enid Blyton's Faraway Tree series, that also remained prominent and to have influences in it. A distinction is sometimes made between accepted artistic and literature representations of fairies and what you should expect to see in a genuine sighting. For example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, should I say, quoted E.L. Gardner's view on fairy wings in his Coming of the Fairies in 1922. And the quote goes, "The wings are a feature that one would hardly expect to find in conjunction with arms. In this respect, the insect type, with its several limbs and two or more wings, is a nearer model. But there is no articulation and no venation, and moreover, the wings are not used in flying. Streaming imitations is the only description that one can apply. In some varieties, particularly the sylphs, the streamers surround the body, as by a luminous aura sprayed to a feathery mist." And what that is saying is, though there are many pictures and illustrations that seem to depict fairies with wings like we would need arms, almost like they need their wings, in most stories the wings are not needed for flight and they are literally there just for looking. There's nothing that states they should have wings and that they do have wings. It's more common to say that this streamers surround the body. What that means is it's more of a mist of a luminous sort of aura that would surround the body as they moved through the air. And as they were so fast, they would leave this feathery mist behind them. That's more likely than to see them with wings. The idea that fairies have wings, though, was firmly established following the Cottingley fairy hoax because they became more accepted after that. I mean, that was by the middle of the 20th century, they were definitely accepted with wings. Although not all fairies were viewed as having wings, They were definitely one of the more popular versions. Even today, not all creatures that could be regarded as fairies, as they were assumed to have wings. So just because there's a being with wings does not mean it's a fairy, and just because there is a being that does not have wings but you would think was a fairy doesn't mean that it is not either. And it's one of those theories where wings came in more as a pleasing feature to please the eye, and it has really nothing to do with what the creature is. And that's more or less saying that's the idea. I mean, look at leprechauns. They've never been shown with wings, but then again, if you look at the Irish Fae, the Irish Fae have never actually depicted fairies with wings or to even have wings. So, when we come to the colour of fairies, there's kind of traditional colours that are meant to stay with one type and such, but red and green are the most common colours associated with the fae, especially in Scotland. The men fairies would wear red caps and green occasionally, blue breeches, while women fae would wear green dresses. Hence, if you remember the banshee stories from not just Scotland, but even in Scotland, they would have green dresses on too. Because of their fondness to those type of colours, the fae could take offence to humans who wore their colours. Green was often viewed as an unlucky colour. Irish fairies also wore red and green. On the Isle of Man, fairies dressed in red caps and green coats. The Welsh fae meant to dress in white. Those from Orkney dress in dark grey. Sometimes it almost looks like armour. In England, green was the colour mostly associated with fairies. Trooping fairies are more likely to wear red jackets, and they're sometimes described as wearing grey, but that's less common. Some fairies were naked. Most hobgoblins actually were naked. Some were shown with footwear, some without. Fairy clothes were generally undistinguishable from those of mortals, although sometimes archaic in style, basically thrown together and mismatching. But that was the idea of the fae, they liked bright colours, didn't really care how they went on, but they wore them regardless. From the 16th century onwards, fairies were often said to wear clothes made of flowers, and also they would put them with clothes of blossoms. But they would also say that they used some sort of dew from the rain around them, which gave this silvery gauze around their clothes or their bodies, which made them look more pleasing to the eye. Could be some sort of glamour, though, in all fairness. It doesn't have to be that as such, obviously. But regardless, it has been well known that the green and red are said to be their favourite colours. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but if you wear bright colours, for example, you'll find that a lot of the missing people may have wore those type of colours. Not that I'm saying it's the fae or anything, but it is something that I've noticed that a lot of missing people tend to be wearing these bright colours. There's also the fact that it should never be taken into account that everybody seems to see them very differently, so therefore in different cultures they are shown differently and described differently, and even may have different clothing, different height, etc. But the perception of wings is just that it's something that was done to make it more pleasing to the eye as time went on. As time changes, things change to adhere to that time period, and that's basically what happened, is that they changed it so that the fae adhered to it and made them look pretty for children's books. the characteristics of fairies. The powers that fairies have is incomprehensible to humans. Similarly, their values and ethics are different from ours. They do not think or feel the way humans do. They have their own morality and code behaviour. Not all fairies are pleasant beings. There are stories, kidnapped people, people that drank to excess, then were kidnapped, drank to excess by the encouragement of a female fae. It is also said that some fae will drink to excess and hurt people, but for much of the time, they keep themselves to themselves in general. They guard their privacy fiercely and punish those that spy on them. They hate betrayal, and they hate betrayal of their secrets. They don't want them told. They do not like trespassers. They will severely punish, even if accidental. They will punish any kind of behaviour, even if it's to, let us say, a human type fae, and the fae work close with that being, and that being gets some, there's badness towards them. In one way or another, they will seek revenge for that person just because they feel close to that person. This person will have treated them with respect, won't have asked for anything from them, and will understand that their way is just their way, I guess. It's a very mutual thing, and a lot of people do believe it's all about respect, but it's actually not with the Fae. It is important to respect anything, not like anything, any animal, any being. Respect is always important, so it's not just particular of the Fae now, is it? It's a thing of a life. When communicating with humans, fairies demand qualities that make social intercourse pleasant. No boasting or coarse language on one hand, but no gloominess, a lack of generosity on the other hand. And then you have the other side of them, which swear like troopers. And believe it or not, they don't necessarily understand what they're saying is a bad thing. Some Fae that swear quite a lot, and there's been people that have caught this on spirit boxes and such, where it's almost like it's their conversation. Their conversation is of the swearing type. It's possible that this Fae has heard it too much, being within a particular circle or near a particular community, family, and because it's heard it as in a general purpose, it will use it then as a general purpose and does not mean malicious by it at all. It just comes from the territory it has lived in previously. Certain fairies do not like to be thanked. They dislike meanness, rudeness, selfishness, ill temper, and bad manners. Above all, fairies demand respect for the land and everything that lives there. So you see, it's not about respecting them. It's about respecting every single thing every day in which grows on Mother Earth, in which is on our land, which I can honestly say, looking back when I was younger, I'm trying to think of things and know because I was punished instantly. See, I was brought up in that sort of environment. I was lucky in a way because I wasn't allowed to disrespect anything of Mother Earth, and that made me a better person now, definitely, because now I won't respect anything of Mother Earth's. And I do my utmost best not to. Not that I probably haven't in the past, because who knows what the limits are and where to start. I probably have in the past. I probably have without even thinking about it. And a lot of us do that without even sort of thinking, like, oh, here's one example. So I was running down, and it was like it's a snicket, a ginnel, a long thin road, and either side are bushes with leaves. There's loads of these bushes about, and as I was running as a child, I wasn't running fast because I was a child, but I remember pulling leaves off and being told off by my nan for pulling at them. So there you go, that's an example. Even that can offend them. So just want to make that sort of clear. It's the tiniest of things that you don't even think about, Fairies generally, the morality is not the same. They are so exaggerated. So Things that we would see minor, they will act extremely over the top. They'll be very lavish. They will definitely go overboard, is the word I'm looking for. They can offer very lavish rewards for small kindness and a heavy punishment for a small offence. They may demand adherence to rules and taboos that conflict and often contradict each other. So they can be a little bit like that too, you know. Here's something you may enjoy from my nan's journal, Biogle 1972. What a fuss over such smalls. Dropped a flower. The fuss! The fuss he made over a flower! I picked it up, but he was bouncing and flapping his arms in a wild gesture. I thought he was going to flap away. He started pattering an unindistinguishable language. You could tell he was mad. He was really mad. His face was going red and purple, and he was flapping like he was going to take off into the skies. I tell you, he was flapping just like that. He was shouting this undistinguishable language at me. It took a whole bag of cookie crumbles that I smashed up for the little fellow. Remember, fairies do have this bad temper. That's the best I could translate it. And there's many little things like that in Grandma's journal that are encounters with the little ones, whatever. But it just goes to show you. The glamour and magical beauty of fairies varies. So Scottish word glamour is a variation of gramir or glamier, first used in the 18th century, and describes a type of enchantment whereby things are not perceived as the enchanter wished. It is said to, there's an alteration of the grammar in a medieval sense. Scholarship, especially occult learning, is later developed into its current meaning of magical beauty and become associated with high fashion by 1939. The power allows fairies to be invisible, change their shape, appear as human beings, appear as ghosts. There is a story of a Devon midwife who had been summoned to help the fairies. So, when the child, a fire, bouncing babe was born, its mother gave the midwife some ointment with directions to strike it at the child's eyes. She tried the effect of the ointment upon her eyes. At once, all changed around. The woman was no longer a cottager, but a beautiful lady, attired in white. The babe fairer than before, but still witnessing with the elvish cost of its eye. To its paternity was wrapped in swaddling clothes of silvery gauze, while the elder children who sat either side of the bed were transformed into flat-nosed imps, whom, with mops and maws, were busied to no end in scratching their own polls. That's the hair on top of their heads. That's what that means. Or in pulling the fair lady's ears with their long and hairy paws. The nurse got away from the house of enchantment as quickly as she could. Fairy ointment could break the power of glamour, as could a four-leaf clover. Indeed, often the ointment was made of four-leaf clover sprigs. So what this means is, I'm just going to illustrate on that bit because I know when I translate it from the journal, sometimes it doesn't come out right. It's saying that upon where we live now as such, this earth that we are living upon, if we were to make some ointments and use it in the correct manner, we would probably unglamour a lot of fairies upon the earth that are living as humans. A lot of people believe that the fae ran away and they went to hide. That's history. That's what history says. But my nan so believed that fairies did not run away and hide, but have always been in plain sight and waiting. And I think either could be true. I think either could be true. But that's the idea of the word glamour. It's not just about the glamour of someone looking that way, pretty and such. It's a glamour of covering up what we cannot see via enchantment. It's an enchanting word originally. There are certain people who have permanent or sporadic powers of seeing fairies without fairy permission, usually described as having second sight. 1600. A Lasash man formulated a recipe for an ointment for summoning the fae to see them more easily. And I have the recipe, but it's probably not wise to put it on here because I'd like me and Brett to make some at some point, just out of curiosity. That's all. Just out of curiosity. And it's not got nothing in that could hurt us. So, but it has. There's an ingredient in it that I am actually allergic to, so I'm not sure I'll wear gloves and stuff. But that's something that I would really, really like to try with Brett because I've not seen that recipe anywhere ever since my Nan's journal. It's nowhere. I've not seen it anywhere else. Time, as well, is said to give you sight to the fae. Wild time, that is, laid upon the eyes, will help you see fairies. There is an account from I can't remember who it was, but I can't remember, I'm sorry. I don't know who it actually was, but anyway, I'll have a look and see if I can't find it, but I don't know, and I know I haven't wrote it down, so... That wetting your left eye with spit will dispel fairy glamour when present. Skeptics do argue that fairies change because they are simple human projections. The human mind creates them. As this result, they mutate according to humans' needs and expectations. If only that was actually true. I don't think we'd have such a bad perception of them that way. Fairies may be immortal or simply long-lived, as you said. They do appear to be immortal to us as humans. A dance of minutes may be a dance of a year and a day, or even 200 years to us. A single night in fairyland can be centuries in our world. If you know the story of Malakin, told by Ralph Conchel, 13th century, as this feature, it states, 7 years already in fairyland, must remain another 7 before she may return home. Because it's believed that due to the changes, obviously, in time and in century, that there would be a lot more involved because their time goes so much. Well, they don't have time as such, but if you were looking at it from our perspective, it's much faster over there. And it's the same to be said when you see the other realm, actually. I mean, obviously, I can't say this is fact. To me, it is. To me, it's factual because I see it. I see it too much. But I want to say that it's almost like fast, jerky movements that is everywhere, and then all of a sudden you'll see a being move within the realm, and you can separate then that being from the energy. Although, see, I'm trying to explain this to you, but I've tried to do a video as well where I can show you what I mean when I am seeing this other realm. But whether it'll work or not, I don't know. But yeah. The time of King Richard, there appeared frequently a certain fantastical spirit that regularly had conversations with the family, yet always imitating the voice that was perceived as a 1-year-old child. He called himself Malakin. He could be heard and felt, yet not seen, except once as a very small child, clothed in white, a white tunic actually, in the chamber of a certain maiden. She asked him to show himself, and he made her swear to God she would not touch him or hold him. He said his mother had left him in part of the field where he was taken away. He had been in this position for 7 years, and in another 7 he would be restored back to his former state of living among humans. Ones like him were given such a hat, a special hat, that would make them unseen to the human eye. And again, there's been cloaks, I believe, as well, and things. He often asked for food and drink. This would be placed on a chest for him, where it would immediately vanish. 7 is a common magic number of magic in fairy measurements of time. A delay of a year between events is also common. Tales are told of people who have vanished and returned after many years, looking the same as the day they left, only to find mysteriously that within a few days it's been absolute years in our world. Some tales of stolen babies mention that the children grow up inside fairyland, while only a few days pass outside. There are also tales of people vanishing and never to be seen again. These people are usually wearing bright clothing, and the fae take a liking to their clothing, therefore taking a liking to them. There is also the fact that you should never whistle. Never whistle within the woods, for the whistling calls to the wrong type of fae, and you may just vanish and want to come back and cannot. Of course, they are just myths and legends, remember. There is examples in stories. There is it's an Irish story of Olsin. After falling asleep under an ash tree, Olsin awakes to find Nimaha, the queen of Tirnanock, summoning him to join her in her realm as her husband. He agrees and lives in a paradise of perpetual summer, where death holds no sway. But he breaks the taboo of standing on a broad flat stone and can see the island he left behind. It has changed for the worse, and he begs Nimaha to allow him to return. She reluctantly agrees, but asks he returns after only 1 day with the mortals. Niamh gives him a black horse, which he is told not to dismount, and wisdom and knowledge beyond that of humans he would have, but not to dismount the horse. Once back in Ireland, Olsin realises that decades have passed, and he is no longer known. He dismounts the horse, and immediately his youth goes and he becomes a feeble old man, unable to return to the land of Tir Nanog. There are quite a few variations of that story. One states that the hero turns to dust as soon as his feet touch the ground. However, sometimes the opposite is the case. There's one that's explained in a tale from Pembrokeshire. A young shepherd joined a fair dance, found himself in a glittering palace surrounded by the most beautiful gardens, where he passed many years in happiness among the fair people. There was only one prohibition. In the middle of the garden there was a fountain filled with gold and silver fish. He was told that on no account should he drink out of it. He desired increasingly to do so, and at last plunged his hands into the pool. At once the whole palace vanished. He was back on the hills, cold among his sheep. Only minutes had passed since he joined the fairy dance. So that's kind of shows you the other way around, whereas he thought he'd been in Fairyland for quite a long time, but actually only a few minutes passed in our time, so it does vary from one extreme to the other. Tricks and pranks. Fairies often have a dark sense of humour. That is very true, by the way. They interfere with all things related to everyday life and often play pranks on people, many being extremely childish. Some of these pranks are actually quite common. Tangling and braiding of hair of the sleeping people, and horses, particularly horses. They're called elf locks, and it's more about tangling wires and cables now. However, it did start with a simple prank of tangling the hairs of sleeping people or horses. And the particular braid, it is quite tangling. Not that it looks a mess as such, that tangling I think is the wrong word to use, but it would be hard to unbraid. It would be braided in such a way, it'd be very different. If the fairies feel offended, they may make objects lift. They can also sour milk. They can change particular things in drinks to make them taste yuck. The fairies have some sort of element of control over seasons and weather, it is believed by some. And at the very least, they can cause a blight on plants, illness in animals and humans. However, they can also heal injuries and cure the sick when they actually wish to do so. There's long been tales of people finding horses that have particular braids in their manes, and I do believe it still goes on today. And it's believed that's the fairies basically that they're coming to braid the animal's hair. For fertility, this is the most basic power to such as the fae. They can influence it, and many stories describe how a farmer who honours them properly, and they watch over his crops and animals and the family, while on that sort of wavelength with them, they will come to no ruin, no harm, and they have been known to give life to a family, so a baby, but they've also been known to take away from the family, so it works on both levels. It's also believed that they can generate light from their bodies and light up even a large room. It's like an illumination. They are clairvoyancy. Second sight, the ability to foretell the future. They can also grant this ability to humans, although in humans it will fade over time. The Fae can also revoke it if they choose. Their senses are also enhanced. They've got better eyesight, better hearing, taste, touch, senses, and smell. They can be invisible to the human eye. But more importantly is they create items that can make them invisible to the human eye. And the rest is more of a camouflage, a blending in, and a vibrational state that they enter. So when you're not on the same vibration as them, you won't see them. They can also heal, and they can heal fairly quick. It's it's not been I've not heard a story in a long time about a fae healing a human, but they can do this. And also they have different ointments and such that can be used in healing purposes for themselves and obviously for humans. But those stories go way back. There's none really that are more up to date. They can communicate with animals, which is fairly obvious. They tend to understand how animals feel and how their connections work. They can summon animals immediately to a particular area for protection. The idea that they are in flight may come from more rather than having wings, but them being able to go back into the elements and sort of be on the backs of birds or take on the air as an element so that they can flow through the air. But there are still some that believe they have wings and that's how it's done. But it's more of an aura where they will take the element of air and use it. They do have quite a few pastimes that they enjoy. They love to steal and borrow. They think nothing of it from stealing. They don't give it a second thought, really. They won't put up with anyone stealing from them, however, and they will punish theft ruthlessly. You can view it as stealing, but they view it as borrowing, and they may return items when they finish with them. Not always, but they can return items, although it's really important to understand that when they do return an item, don't fear that something might be missing. It might be in bits, it just depends. They have been known to make loans, but payment must be fair and equivalent of what they lend. They're offended if more is offered than they are explicitly thanked. So they don't like being thanked, overly thanked, but they don't like having more given to them what should be. They know what's fair and just. There's actually a traditional story from Worcester. It's it's called Os Barrow Roseberry Rock. It was a favourite haunt of the fairies. It is said that a man and a boy were ploughing in an adjoining field, sorry. They heard an outcry, and obviously they went to see what this outcry was all about. What was the matter, it states. They come to a fairy who had lost his pick or pickaxe. After much searching, the ploughman found it for him. The fairy said to go to a certain corner where they would get their reward. They went, and there was bread, cheese, and cider. The man enjoyed all-heartedly. The boy was too frightened, and he would not partake in the feasting of the gifts. As you know, they were told not to ever eat that kind of food, I guess, so you could understand that. Giving clothes to a brownie or complaining or complimenting their work will cause a great offence. That's well known, I think, throughout most people know this in different cultures. In other cases, brownies are said to be delighted with a gift of clothing. Fairy gifts are given in secret, and you should keep it to oneself. You should not talk about it fluently and oftenly, for you will lose your gifts. It's widely believed that fairies cannot lie, and that is true, but they stretch the truth and will omit to say anything important. 12th century Welsh writings, the fae sort of worship the truth, but once a human ally lies or steals, they will be banished from fairyland forever. The fae believe in keeping promises, and that is very extremely important to them. So, what it is with the idea of fairies lying, actually, do you know, they don't lie, but they have a way with their mouth and their tongue so that they can stretch the truth, they can exaggerate the truth in such a way that it's still true. You know, it's very hard to explain. They're very, very good at it. But no, they'll not stand for being lied to. They'll not stand for anything like that. They would literally just not have anything to do with you anymore. I guess that's how it is, you know. Sorry, guys. There is examples in stories. There is a once interacting with the fae, you'll realise that just because they can do it and get away with it, you can't to them. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it for there, guys, and continue the rest probably another time as we're up to this point, because the next we're going on to sort of the pastimes of the fairies, what they do in their free time, and they have nothing else to do. Love and light.